used to want you so bad. My grandma told me a story, maybe even 15 years ago, in which a family came here from Brazil, I think it was, and became friends with my grandma's friend. And the grandma's friend, she went to the seaside, on holidays, and she invited this family along with her. When they got there, they went on a walk and came to a cliff from which, for the first time that holiday, the sea was visible. And they all stopped, and my grandma's friend said, "Can everyone who has seen the ocean before please step back?" And everyone took a step back apart from this family who were left to look at the sea. Sorry the last episode was so sluggish. I think it's that I was enamoured by that flattering half lighting I found myself in and thought the best video I could make was just standing there when in fact I should have just got on with what I was meant to say. So I know I do have the odd error, but I think I'm learning. I think that Carver video succeeded, and I think this one here will be epic because I passionately love this book and I passionately love this author. It's an incredibly powerful and moving book. I'm sure that you can think of the scenes that awed and silenced you without me needing to identify them for you. And there isn't much I can do here. But I think we can try to understand where the power comes from and what it does to us. So let's begin. Much Hemingway commentary is careless and formulaic. It starts by describing his style as terse, lean, muscular, economical, whatever. It then highlights in a given passage the abundance of monosyllabic words and the absence of adverbs and adjectives. It then attributes this style to his time as a journalist at the Kansas City Star, and for the rest of the commentary we are discussing his life. We hear how he lived in various countries and saw various wars. Finally, that he liked drinking, bullfighting, boxing and hunting will serve as a segue into some suggestions about masculinity, which will include the word macho and mention that he had many wives. Chuck in a picture of an iceberg and a Cézanne painting, and we're done. Aside from not reading carefully or caringly enough, which we can't know they were guilty of, the error such commentators make is to put the stylistic before the human. It's fair enough, his style is perhaps the most alluring of all. If you Google his name now, the first thing that comes up isn't him, but an app that edits your writing to make you sound more like him. But trying to understand the power of his works via his style is fruitless. We must ask not how, but why, for his style is a consequence of his beliefs about life, about what it's like to be human. The style was forged as a tool to try and represent these beliefs truly. He said the writer's job is to tell the truth. I think I've identified two knots of belief. We'll call the first infinity and the second refuge. Infinity. Recurring across Hemingway's body of work is the concern that words constrict and destroy the things they are trying to express. That articulation is suffocation. The earliest example I could think of is in his first collection of short stories in our time, in the story Soldier's Home. A Marine called Krebs returns from the war. When he tells people about the war, we hear a distaste for everything that had happened to him in the war set in because of the lies he had told. All of the times that he had been able to make him feel cool and clear inside himself when he thought of them, the times so long back when he had done the one thing, the only thing for a man to do, easily and naturally, when he might have done something else, now lost their cool, valuable quality, and then were lost themselves. Now, he attributed then this distaste to the fact that it was lying, but then he says, his lies were quite unimportant lies. And in that is the germ of the later broader belief that all articulation suffocates. In one of his last books, and maybe my favourite, A Movable Feast, we have, I even read aloud the part of the novel that I had rewritten, which is about as low as a writer can get and much more dangerous for him as a writer than glacier skiing unroped before the full winter snowfall has set over the crevices. And this isn't a belief unique to him. His pal and fellow Lost Generation Paris 20s partygoer F. Scott Fitzgerald said, I think it's a pretty good rule not to tell what a thing is about until it's finished. If you do, you always seem to lose some of it. It never quite belongs to you so much again. But the best I'm quite proud of my own articulation is suffocation, to be honest, but the the best expression of the sentiment I've heard comes from Nietzsche, however you say that, however you say that, and he says, that for which we find words is something already dead in our hearts. There is always a kind of contempt in the act of speaking. And we know that this is true, mechanically at least. If I say person, you can imagine anyone. If I say male, your concept becomes narrower. If I say male in red shirt, etc., then from the fog emerges a more kind of defined, gradually a more defined shape, and eventually, I've written here. By the time I say male person, 23 years old, sensitively, sincerely, vulnerably, powerfully, culture-shiftingly, offering his thoughts on literature with eyes like the ocean under a clouded sun, there's only one person you can think of. But the point, anyway, is that the more we describe, the more we constrict. It's not a bad thing. It's not obviously a bad thing, but it's mechanically true. It's very noticeable how seldom Hemingway attempts to articulate a character's feelings, and how brief and flat he tries to keep it when he does. So we see a concern that words constrict, and a reluctance to put words to feeling. Why? Well, I'm sure you're seeing it by now. So, but let's start as simply as we can and build up. If we say something's blue, then it can't be not blue, right? That's fine for objects, but it seems too simple for human feeling. Fleabag, I think, is the most powerful TV show I've ever watched. And I read a great review, which despite I've looked everywhere, I can't find anymore, sadly, which said Fleabag represented a third generation of female characters on the screen, because the first kind of weak, vague, ditzy, kind of like, run along now, man talk characters were weak, right, and obviously unsatisfactory. And then the second generation, or kind of a response to that, was, a kind of female superhero rides a motorbike, beats up like 10 goons at once, is tough, doesn't like need or want anyone. And while that was a better than the previous, it was still unsatisfactory, because just as it is wrong and too small to say that women are weak, it is also wrong and too small to say that women are not weak. They both miss the mark. If we want to talk about a woman or any human truly, we must say that they are both weak and not weak, strong and not strong. The reviewer gave this wonderful list of words that meant the opposites of each other, antonyms, that's called, that both described Fleabag. I wish I had them, but I've had to kind of make my own makeshift one. But it's, say she was weak and strong, distant and intimate, selfish and selfless, reckless and responsible, cruel and kind, sad and happy, and so on. And isn't this right? Isn't this what we're like, kind of suspended between opposites, sliding and kind of skidding and slipping between them, kind of perpetually off balance, and maybe even dismayed by the lack of friction? Because can any one of us earnestly say we are one and not the other, out of selfish and generous, of hard-working and lazy, of relaxed and anxious, of confident and timid, of kind and cruel, of honest and dishonest, of happy and sad? Can we ever plant our flag in one and disavow the other? If you can, tell me, because I'd be interested. But would we believe anyone who claimed he could, or she could? I think not. Life is a thing more subtle than that. So Fleabag did that for female characters on screen, and I think Hemingway in this book is trying to do a similar thing with feeling. His work explicitly evinces a comparable concern with coexisting contradictions. In this book, Maria's body is said to have a warm coolness, but the best example is in A Movable Feast, where he has, "After writing a story, I was always empty and both sad and happy, as though I had made love." Isn't that so strange and so correct? Sad and happy. Yeah, a human feeling is many things. It's never really just. It's hundreds of emotions, memories, thoughts, relationships, hopes, sights, sounds. It's futile to try and list this, but feeling is, if not infinite, close enough. Hemingway knew this, and he was humble about it. Listing antonyms is not a workable solution. A different technique was required. Hemingway's biggest influence is probably Tolstoy. Tolstoy has a story called Alyosha the Pot, in which a young servant boy with just a shit life gets on with everything, all his hardship, cheerfully and uncomplainingly. Then he falls in love with a servant girl, the cook, but his dad forbids the marriage, and Alyosha, being Alyosha, doesn't complain and just carries on. And we begin to wonder if his perpetual cheerfulness and unprotesting nature are as good a thing as they seemed. And eventually he falls off a roof, and the girl joins him at his bedside while he dies. And we're not sure whether he regrets his approach to life or whether it's bringing him peace. Tolstoy tells us right at the end, just for his death, that he was surprised by something, but doesn't tell us what it was. He spoke very little. He only said he was thirsty, and he seemed full of wonder at something. He lay in wonderment, then stretched himself and died. George Saunders, American writer, gives a great reading of this story. Some of the things he says: why omit those final thoughts that would have told us exactly how to read the story? Well, maybe that's it. He didn't want to tell us exactly how to read the story. The story makes a beautiful case for cheerful obedience. The story makes a beautiful case for the argument that making a beautiful case for cheerful obedience is a gift to tyrants. Which is it? The wonder of the story is that it fails to answer that question, or rather that it succeeds in answering in favour of both views simultaneously. We want to privilege one reading over the other, but the story won't let us. Contradictoriness is not folly. A fool is stubborn, but does not know how to contradict himself. Tolstoy knew how to contradict himself. In declining to answer, in obscuring the place where it might have answered, it's not avoiding the question, but irradiating it with increased intensity. The most artful and true thing is sometimes simply that which allows us to avoid being false. The swerving away, the deletion, the declining to decide, the falling silent, the waiting to see, the knowing when to quit.